listening to Cougar Radio at Misericordia University. Hello all you beautiful guys, gals, and interdimensional beings that may be listening out there. My name is Mitchell Hall, and you are listening to Mitchell's Mystery Hour. Why is it a mystery, you ask? Because it's a new topic every single week. So I just want to give a quick warning. I just wanted to make sure that all you guys out there are staying safe, staying cautious. Be sure to stay 6 feet away, and be sure to use your blueberry crumble hand sanitizer, if you're me, of course. So today we have a very special guest on the show today. We have my father, the one, the only, Ellis Hall, everybody. Say hi, Dad.
Hello, everybody out there. Thanks, Mitch, for having me a part of the show.
So we were actually watching a show. I don't even remember what it was, but we were watching a show yesterday, and I'm like, Dad, you should be on my show. And I'm like, well, we should talk about, TV shows, since, we have a couple that we've enjoyed throughout the years. So I think that's what we're going to talk about today. So actually the first show that I wanted to talk about was one that always had a special place in my heart, and that was the one and the only AMC's The Walking Dead.
Good show.
So this show has been on for, it's always been my number one show on television that I've watched since it began sometime back in, I think, 2010, 2009, somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm.
So the show is actually about the human race, or what's left of it, trying to survive the zombie apocalypse that's essentially torn apart the governments and the world itself. The main star, Rick Grimes, is the main character, played by the very talented Andrew Lincoln. He's the sheriff of a small town in Georgia, actually, who was put into a coma by a gunshot during a high-speed chase. And he essentially wakes up from this coma to the world as he knew it has, essentially fallen apart. But to me, the show began, it had a great, it started out nice and quiet, great opener, and it turns into this insane high-speed chase. So it's the show essentially picks up when Rick wakes up from this coma, and it's all about him trying to find his loved ones as well as any other survivors that may have made it along the way. But Dad, I want to know what you have to say about what you thought when the show first aired. I remember us sitting there at the very first episode back in 2009 when it premiered. I want to know what you had to say about that, though.
Well, Mitch, when I first saw the show, I thought, oh, this is just going to be another, traditional zombie show or movie. And, we started watching it together, and it actually surprised me. The first episode hooked me right away, and I loved it. And, each episode I thought got better and better as it went on. You're right, Rick Grimes was the show in the beginning. I love Rick, he's my favorite character. The show was about him for several seasons, and then, of course, he left recently, and the show kind of took a turn towards other characters, but it was a great show. Hooked me right from the start. Love it, and still enjoy watching it. Not as much as I used to, because Rick's not there anymore, but still a good show to watch, and it's definitely addicting.
So one thing that I actually think that the show does very well is that, it's a zombie show, but the zombies and for quite several years now, the zombies haven't been the problem. It's people that are the problem. Some people that have found, quote unquote, other ways to adjust to this new world, which actually leads me to one of the show's main. He's not a villain anymore, but he was essentially the show's main villain for quite some time, and that man is Negan, who is essentially a psychopath with a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire, who basically just smiles the entire time. And when he isn't smiling anymore is when you have to be worried. But I think one of the show's downfalls was definitely that he was the main villain for way too long. But I want to know what you have to say about Negan himself.
Well, Negan is a great character, and he's a pivotal part of the show, and he definitely is being portrayed by the right person. I think that Jeffrey Dean Morgan was a great casting choice, and you're right, he was the main villain for quite some time. They did have it go on for several seasons, and it kind of dragged at the end. He's still a pivotal character, but not the way he used to be. I think the show's success all along was the fact that they kept moving from threat to threat to threat. And they kind of stalled with Negan. And you're right, it went on too long. Now I know at this point in the show they have other threats that they've been dealing with, but I think they lost a lot of viewers with that. I think it definitely had an impact on their ratings.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that they're trying to essentially, for anybody out there who's a fan of the show, Norman Reedus, who is a very talented actor, don't get me wrong, he plays Daryl, everyone's favorite tree lover, but they essentially wanted to they're making him the main character of the show. They're paying him the amount of every contract out there for every other person combined. So do you really think that Norman Reedus is really worth that much money, and can he carry the show?
Well, I don't know about the money part of it, but I think it's difficult for him to step into the role to fill Rick's shoes. Rick is a totally different type of character than Daryl. Daryl is a quiet, loner character who thrives in the woods and who doesn't really need anybody else to get him where he wants to go. And Rick was the total opposite. He was a family man, wanted to be around people, wanted to protect them, and it's just a different type of character to ask the character of Daryl to take over as the lead. I think they're too big of shoes to fill. Actually, I think it definitely is a different show.
Yeah, it definitely has a definitely has a different feel to it. But I actually want to backtrack. Jeffrey Dean Morgan is, like you said, a fantastic actor. He's phenomenal at the role. They couldn't have picked anyone better. But I think that villains are actually one thing that the show did very well for quite some time. Is even if you look back at Joe, who led this random group of they were, you don't actually know who they are, but they're really bad guys, which is obvious, as seen from the past. And we've seen insane cannibalistic people at Terminus, and even the governor, who is insane. He's practically, he is insane. There's no guessing about it. But he definitely was a different type of villain between him and Negan. I wish I could remember the actor's name. I apologize, I don't know the actor's name who plays the governor. But he was a completely different villain. What were your thoughts on the governor during those seasons? I mean, it did last for quite some time, but I want to know what you thought about him.
It did. It lasted a while, but it didn't seem to drag at all. It seemed like it was moving at a nice pace. It kept you hooked. It was very interesting. The governor was a great character, and I think that's been The Walking Dead's bread and butter all along, has been their villains. Their villains and their enemies have been great. Everybody they've picked has been a great adversary for the team. And even up till the most recent one of Alpha and her sidekick. Yeah, I can't remember, Beta, I believe is his name, yes. Great casting choices, great villains. The governor was one of the best, though. He definitely, I think it's a toss-up for me between Jeffrey Dean Morgan as Negan and the gentleman who played the governor. I think it's a toss-up for who my favorite would be. Similar in some ways, but very different in others. But both great. It's hard to choose one, though.
How would you compare Negan to the governor themselves in terms of how they ran their I should say groups, their towns?
Well, the way Negan was, in my opinion, was he wanted his group to survive through the work of the people. He felt that people were resources. The governor did not feel that way. The governor just cared about himself and what he could build himself. And the governor was all about revenge. If I can't have it, then you can't have it. Negan wasn't like that. Negan just said, "You can have it, but I want 3/4 of it." And that two totally different approaches. One wanted the people, the other one did not. So definitely a contrast in style there.
So I know that several characters have left the show through the years, including the main star of Rick Grimes and Andrew Lincoln, who plays him. I know we've seen many characters come and go. Some are still there, which shouldn't be. Cough, Rosita. But
Yeah.
there are some characters that have gone and come back, such as Lauren Cohan, the very talented actress who plays Maggie Rhee on the show. She's essentially now the queen of the apocalypse now, as everyone's referring to her. What's your opinion on her leaving and then coming back? What kind of role do you think that Maggie will play for the future of The Walking Dead?
Well, I think for the show it was important that Maggie came back. Because I think that for the show, they needed someone who could really take over the leadership role for the survivors. And that's going to be her. And I think that's going to be her long-term goal and impact to the show, is that she's going to eventually become the leader of all of the survivors. She's a very strong leader. She has that style and that leadership type that they need, that the character of Daryl does not have. So I think she's going to be very important to the group as they move forward in that leadership role. And I know you're talking about characters who have gone and that we missed. I don't know about you, but for me, my favorite character that's gone now that I wish was back was Abraham. Abraham was essentially a military man who had since retired from the military and lost his family. And he just had a great outlook on life and had a lot of great one-liners. And I miss him. I miss his sense of humor. For me, if I had to pick one character that I miss the most, besides Rick, of course, because he's my favorite, it would be Abraham. I don't know about you.
Oh, that's a tough one. In terms of characters that are gone, that's definitely a tough one. I'd probably have to go with Abraham as well. He was between Abraham or, I don't know. I enjoyed Jesus. He was a great character. He was a great character on the show. For anybody out there who doesn't watch the show, who doesn't know, he has long hair and a beard. He looks like the actual the man himself. But he's sort of like a kung fu karate master, which you wouldn't think you'd see in the apocalypse. But he definitely rocked it with a nice long black trench coat. But he would definitely be. I'd probably say Jesus would be the one I would want to come back.
Yeah.
But speaking of being able to fight, in martial arts and hand-to-hand combat, recently the show introduced a new mystery character whose identity we still don't know yet, because he wears an iron mask with a hood to cover his face. What's your opinion on the man with the iron mask himself, and who you think that he is? Is he a character we know, or is he a character that we have yet to meet?
Well, there's been a lot of speculation out on the internet if you look to see who that is. I think it's a character we have not met yet. There's been a lot of speculation that it could be Morgan's son. There's some speculation that some other people. I think it's a gentleman who was big in the comics in the I can't think of the name of the place in Ohio where they all are supposed to be.
The Commonwealth?
Commonwealth, that's it, thank you. I think that he is a pivotal character from the Commonwealth. I believe his name is Frost.
Frost or Mercer, they're two.
Frost or Mercer, one of the two. I think he's going to be one of those two. And I think we're going to find out that that's who he is. He belongs to the Commonwealth, and he's one of their main characters.
See, now I was thinking that same thing myself. I was thinking it was Mercer, because for anybody who's a comic book fan out there of The Walking Dead and the show itself, Mercer in the comic books is he's the leader of the Commonwealth's military, and he also uses hatchet type throwing weapons when he fights. Unlike the other soldiers, that's what makes him different from the other soldiers. And this man in the iron mask clearly knows how to fight and knows how to use these axe-type weapons, these pickaxe weapons. And to me, they're kind of. I feel like they want you to think it's Mercer, but I don't think it is. I'm gonna stick with Dwayne that the internet says. And for anybody out there who doesn't know who Dwayne is Morgan Jones's son, who was supposedly had died in I believe it was the 4th or 5th season that they found Morgan.
Yep. Yeah.
But Morgan, for a little backstory, Morgan was the very first human that Rick ever encountered, who saved Rick from a wandering zombie when Rick had woken up weary and tired from being in that coma for several weeks. And, if you ever want to see Morgan, watch Fear the Walking Dead, spin-off of The Walking Dead, great show. Morgan's the main character on there now because he moved over. Because they said, let's not kill him, let's just move him over. So that was a smart move on their part.
Good choice.
But I definitely think that I'm going to go with the internet and say that Dwayne is the man in the iron mask.
You might be right.
But speaking of unknown identities, what's your opinion on the Commonwealth? Because for anybody out there who doesn't know, you were there when we watched the episode.
Mm-hmm.
The Commonwealth military look like stormtroopers from Star Wars. For any Star Wars fans out there, imagine stormtroopers but without the big helmets. That's what the Commonwealth Army is. So I actually want to know. You had some very strong opinions on their look.
I did.
And I want you to actually tell the people out there what you thought about their outfits.
I have to admit, I did have some very strong opinions. It kind of set me off a little bit watching it because, our regular group of survivors that we've watched the whole time are basically reduced to riding horses with wooden wagons and windmills to have water moving and electricity. And here we have this group of would-be stormtroopers that have all this futuristic plastic molded armor, and it just made me laugh because I don't know how we could go from one extreme to the other and that be feasible in an apocalypse where there's no new manufacturing other than what you hand build. So I don't know. For me, it's kind of iffy.
Yeah, the first time that you said that, I kind of cracked up. But to me, my thinking, we can't forget the spears, obviously, because they have the wagons, but they got the spears too, so you can't forget that.
Yep.
But for me, it was like, well, if they take all the smartest people in Ohio and in the surrounding areas, and you bring them all together, it might be possible to build something.
I don't know. It's a stretch with no, running water, electricity, no utilities in the future. I don't know. It's possible. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, the only thing that's guaranteed that I know the person in charge of this entire group, known as the Commonwealth, is not very likable. For anybody out there, I'm a huge fan of the comic books, and you're a huge fan. Pamela, she's got that sort of pantsuit business lady type vibe that you would get, and she's definitely not a likable person. And her mentality is that she's trying to repair the world by keeping our society the way it was before the world fell. If you're rich, you're rich. If you're poor, you're poor. And I'm not sure how that's going to play in, but
that doesn't work now at this time.
No, it doesn't. And I'm hoping for good things in the future. And yeah, guys, we're gonna be taking a short break, so anybody out there who's listening, stay tuned for more of Mitchell's Mystery Hour when we come back. Thanks, guys. Welcome back, all you beautiful guys, gals, and interdimensional beings that may be listening out there. So, before we left, we were talking about TV shows with the one and only Ellis Hall, my father. We talked about The Walking Dead and, several things about the show that happened in the past and now. But I actually want to shift focus a little bit to something a little more modern, a little more actual that could happen in real life. And that's a show called The Blacklist. So a little background on the show. For anybody who doesn't know, The Blacklist is essentially about Raymond Reddington, who is the FBI's number 3 most wanted, I believe he is.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3 most wanted, and he's helping the FBI, a special task force formed in the FBI to solve crimes. But it's not like your every other day cop show. It's different because he's a criminal himself, and the task force who is built doesn't really trust him. But for some reason, he's enamored by this profiler who's assigned to their task force, because she's the only one that he'll speak to, and her name is Elizabeth Keene. She's played by a very talented actress whose name escapes me, and I apologize. But it just has a different feel to it, because Raymond Reddington is portrayed by the very talented James Spader, who is a phenomenal actor. He's been a phenomenal actor ever since he started, and I'm a huge fan of his work, because he's different. He's not only is he eccentric and he's different, but he also gives off those terrifying vibes when the character of Raymond Reddington gets angry. But Dad, I want to know what you have to say about the character himself in terms of the show.
Well, I think the show hit the nail on the head with James Spader. He's great. He is a great actor. This part is just tailor-made for him. I get the feeling in watching the show that this is not a stretch for him. In other words, I think that the charisma and the attitude and things that the character portrays on the show, all the legal stuff, of course, is very similar to how James Spader is in real life. And that just carries through the show. I think he's a great actor. I think the role is perfect for him. And I think the show is great. It's very interesting. It keeps you hooked every episode. And I look forward to every single episode. I just can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, that's you hit the nail right on the head with how he's just very he can play the character, but he's also I feel like the way the character of Raymond Reddington dresses, he's always sharply dressed with a nice long black trench coat and always has a matching fedora on his head. And it's just that the fedora, I feel like, is what says it all for the character, because in one of the episodes, for me, we see this gentleman who we have no idea who he is at the time. He's arriving home, and he hears his wife calling to him from the kitchen, from the other room, saying that they have a guest over at the house, and she didn't know that he didn't have company coming over. And he looks to the coat hanger and sees the fedora, and the look that just falls upon his face is just, it says it all with how the character is and how he acts. And for me, it's like you said, he was made for the part. And in terms of the criminals they catch, I think a lot of them are picked. They're good actors as well to play these characters, because these aren't normal criminals, your run-of-the-mill bank robbers. These are people that are in search of chemical weapons to attack the world, and arms dealers, and basically not good stuff. And these people, the FBI doesn't even know that these people exist, according to Raymond Reddington, the character himself. But he knows they exist because he has a list. Hence the name of the blacklist on the title of the show. But for me, like I just said, some of these actors that they have picked to play some of these blacklisters, though, it's pretty good. They do a well job of casting the actors for the specific role of this blacklister.
Yeah, I agree. I think, again, it's another show where the villains really help the show quite a bit. They pick the right people, and every episode it's a new person, a new villain, and there always seems to be the right casting choice. So I don't know who's making their decisions, but whoever is, A+ for them, because they're doing a great job, definitely.
So in terms of the villains themselves, like you just said, whoever's making the decisions is doing a good job. One of the villains that really stuck out for me, though, was portrayed by a very talented actor, Nathan Lane, who played Timon on Lion King. I forget his number. My apologies. He had a special nickname for himself though too. He was looking for a treasure, a list of unmarked bills that was hidden inside a supposed bank that was worth billions, and he wasn't your ordinary villain. He was very comedic. You could definitely hear the Timon in him from Timon and Pumbaa from Lion King. He was just hilarious, and to have him on the show as a bad guy definitely gave me all kinds of feelings that I wasn't quite sure if I liked him or hated him.
Yeah, one of my favorites so far, and granted there's more episodes to come. One of my favorites so far, I don't recall the gentleman's name who played him, but he often goes back to him when he needs assistance, and that's the guy who is the demolitions expert, the guy who builds all the bombs, and it's the character is just different because he's a demolitions expert, but he drinks heavily, so he just seems to get better the more he drinks. It's kind of strange. But he is a great character. I enjoy seeing him. He kind of has a reoccurring role once in a while. Whenever Reddington needs to go back to somebody for that kind of explosives or demolition stuff, he always goes back to him. But he's one of my favorites so far.
In terms of the people that reoccur, I mean, they're like, as according to Reddington, the character himself, he doesn't have friends. He has associates. So, for me, like I think he secretly enjoys some of the people whose company he has, such as like Dembe, his bodyguard Dembe, who is one of the most lovable characters in the entire show.
Yeah, I agree.
For me, he didn't start out that way though. He was very tough and very rugged, but as we see each character throughout the show interact with him, he grows more and more tender and more soft as he not only interacts with the characters, but we learn more of his backstory and where he came from. And I want to know what you have to say about Dembe.
Dembe's probably, outside of James Spader and as Raymond Reddington, Dembe's probably one of my favorite characters. He's just a great addition. He's very tough, and he can do things that are not good, but he's also very likable. He's a family man. He protects Raymond Reddington. He protects him as a friend, not just as a boss. And he's a great character, and it would be, hopefully nothing happens to him on the show. He's a great addition, and I think it wouldn't quite be the same without.
So in terms of reoccurring characters themselves, we've been talking about reoccurring characters. One of the main characters that I know we enjoy making fun of, but we also like because he's very useful, is FBI agent Donald Ressler, who is essentially I guess I would say he's in charge of the task force underneath their director Harold Cooper, who's actually in charge of the task force.
Yeah.
I feel like he leaves Ressler in charge of everybody to essentially get the job done. But for anybody who doesn't know about Ressler, he is the human gazelle. He can chase down any criminal that tries to make a run for it in the show. And I even in dress shoes, I've noticed. I mean, we always make fun of him for it when we're watching because he's just so fast, and honestly, I would go as far as to say he's the fastest character on the show. I essentially watched him pole vault onto a moving U-Haul truck that was 40 feet away, going 90 miles an hour, and he chased this truck down, and for me, I'm just enamored by how fast he is. I don't know if the actor's actually that fast, or if the filming just makes him look that fast, but I want to know what you have to say about Ressler and his gazelle-like speed.
No, I think he really is that fast. Because it doesn't look like they're doing any kind of alteration with the filming or anything like that. I genuinely believe he is just a very fast individual while running. I think he could easily track down a vehicle on the street. He's pretty fast. I think it's legit.
You think he's really that fast?
I do.
It's very impressive to see him run, but he's so quick on his feet. But we're talking about these characters, and one of the characters I feel like he's moving into a more main role, who started out actually as a nobody tech person, is he's their guy in the chair, as people would refer to him as. His name is Aram. I like Aram. He's a great guy. He has funny one-liners, and like I said, he's their guy in the chair. He hacks everything and gets everything disarmed and taken down, and to me he was a great addition to the show. He's had his heart broken way too many times, just saying, but he's a great guy, great character, and I enjoy the character himself. But I want to know what you have to say about Aram.
Well, I think he's a great supporting character. He definitely has come into his own, I think, more as the show progresses. He wasn't involved much in the very beginning, like you said, but he's gotten more involved now. And the thing I like about his character is he is secretly enamored with Raymond Reddington's lifestyle. He'll often help Raymond Reddington when he knows he probably shouldn't. But I like the fact that he just is so intrigued by Raymond that he'll help him, and he does it on the side, because it's just kind of like a secret obsession almost. So yeah, he's definitely a great supporting character.
And the final main character, who essentially is the other main character besides Raymond Reddington himself, is the character of Elizabeth Keene, who is this FBI profiler that Raymond Reddington is enamored by, and he'll only give these names essentially to her. And why do you think from the beginning? I mean, we obviously know because we've watched the show, but for any of the new viewers out there, why do you think he was so enamored by her from the beginning?
Well, from the beginning, they kind of led you to think that he was her father. And, I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen the show yet. We certainly won't say whether or not he is. But as the show, progresses, they lead you to believe that he is, in the way that he treats her, and, he protects her and he cares about her and he only wants to deal with her. They lead you to believe that that's the case. So, if you want to find out for sure whether he is or isn't, you definitely should watch the show. And I do want to give a shout out, Mitch, to one character who was a small supporting character with his roles, but Raymond would go back to him on several occasions for assistance. And that is the gentleman who was his tracker, so to speak, who would track people down for him. His name was Glenn. And he was great. The interactions between Raymond Reddington and Glenn were fantastic. And even though he was a supporting character, he was very good. And unfortunately, he passed away in real life a couple of weeks ago. But great actor, and also a great addition to the show.
Yeah, Glenn was always at the DMV causing all kinds of trouble.
Yeah.
But he was one of the, I agree, he was one of those good supporting characters that the show needed. And for me, I think one of the things that this show really thrives on are its characters, essentially. Even the characters you see one time, or the blacklisters that you see one time, or even those special blacklisters that come back for a part 2, which does occasionally happen. The job isn't always done in one episode. But I think the characters themselves really each character, it's not just, like I said, it's not just a cop show, and it's also not just Raymond Reddington, who's FBI's most wanted, helping the FBI catch criminals. There's also emotional baggage that comes along with all of these characters and what shapes them into what kind of characters they are.
Yeah, and also the internal struggle that the FBI agents have with with what Raymond Reddington does. The internal struggle between what's right and what's wrong. So, yeah, definitely.
Alrighty, guys. We are going to be taking another short break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about the one, the only, the greatest drama show on television, Grey's Anatomy. So stay tuned for more on Mitchell's Mystery Hour, guys. Interdimensional beings that were listening out there, welcome back to Mitchell's Mystery Hour. We were talking with the one and only Ellis Hall, my father, about some of our favorite TV shows we've watched over the past several years. And one show, I mean, for me, I love drama. Drama's one of my favorite things about, one of my favorite genres about television, and one of the things that I love. And I think one show that really does it very well is the medical drama known as Grey's Anatomy. Grey's Anatomy follows Dr. Meredith Grey, who is portrayed by the very talented Ellen Pompeo, timeless. She portrays this doctor who has some intense emotional baggage, such as her father abandoning their family and her mother, who eventually dies of Alzheimer's. And you know, Meredith lives for several years with this fear over her shoulder because of Alzheimer's being genetic. She lives with this fear for several years, and even still today, because it's always what her brain goes to, is, you know, when her loved ones suffer from something she can't figure out. Her fear is it Alzheimer's? Is it going to get them like it got my mother? And even though she essentially disdained her mother and her father, she eventually comes to peace with losing both of her parents from. I mean, they both didn't die from Alzheimer's. Her mother did die from Alzheimer's, but she comes to peace with her parents and this disdain that she had for them. And for me, when I sat down to watch the show, the first episode, you know, she's you know, at her house, and she clearly had a good night with this very handsome, attractive doctor. Well, we don't know he's a doctor. He's a very attractive individual. But she eventually kicks him out. You know, she's saying that she's late for her first day of being an intern at Grace Sloan Memorial Hospital, which it wasn't known by that at the time. But she kicks him out. She gets there. She gets through all her normal things that she would to start the day. And what happens when the elevator opens? She comes face to face with this attractive individual that she woke up next to that same morning. And you know, we eventually learn that he's this world-renowned neurosurgeon, Dr. Derek Shepherd. Dr. Derek Shepherd, portrayed by
Patrick Dempsey.
That's it, yeah, Patrick Dempsey. My apologies. He's a phenomenal actor though, and phenomenal character. But I want to know what you have to say about watching the series even today.
Well, this show's been on for a long time, and the great part about Grey's Anatomy is it hasn't gotten stale. Every season they keep you hooked, and they give you a great storyline throughout the season, and they leave you, wanting to see what happens next, which is a great quality, especially after being on the air for as many seasons as they've been. It's just a great show all around. Characters are fantastic. The storylines are excellent. The storylines are based off of, real life things that have happened. Medical issues that have come up in real life, and storylines and things like that. And the characters are wonderful, and it actually just it's a great show. The interesting part about this show, it doesn't always end in a happy ending. Sometimes it ends not the way you want it to end, but it's real. It's real, which makes it good. It's true to real life.
One thing that the show does very well, similar to The Blacklist, is its characters. And for me, what makes it for these characters is the emotional baggage that they carry, because it defines the type of doctor they are and how they interact with their patients. One doctor for me who has a lot of emotional baggage, if you ask me, is Dr. Mark Sloan, the arrogant but extremely talented plastic surgeon, who actually doesn't come in till a little later in the show, but he was sort of Derek Shepard's best friend, but Derek's wife ends up cheating on Derek with Dr. Sloan, and he's when he first is brought into the show, he seems like a character that you wouldn't enjoy. But for me, as soon as I saw the character, as soon as I saw that arrogant smile, I was like, yes, this is my favorite character in the show. And he was always my favorite character, because even though he was arrogant, he backed up his words. But I want to know what you have to say about Mark, and I want to know who your favorite character is.
Well, you actually were right on with the description of Mark. When he first came in, he kind of was portrayed as the bad guy, the guy that you weren't going to like. He was going to be the problem child. But as time went on, and you got to know the character more, and the character developed more, he actually became a really great character. He had a lot of interesting qualities, and he definitely liked to make the rounds with the women at the hospital. But he was a good character, and when it came down to it, he just wanted to find the right person to be with. And he had a pretty heartbreaking story on the show, actually. But he was a good character. One of my favorites, he was definitely, but my favorite character personally was, her name was Callie, and she was a orthopedic specialist. She was orthopedic surgeon. She was supposed to be one of the best in the world, and I liked her. I liked the actress who portrayed her, and I liked how she was fiery and had a good attitude, and I liked the storylines that they had with her, and she's just very interesting. She's fun to watch, and definitely miss her character on the show.
Yeah, both of them are very, very talented actors and actresses who portrayed the characters as well. But there are, like I said, there are characters that have gotten better over the years of the show that were disliked, and now they're loved. But for me, there are characters that have declined in fashion of the character themselves. Definitely for me, the first one that comes to mind is Dr. Arizona Robbins. She is, I believe she's the head of pediatrics for a while, and for me, her character was, she starts out as very happy-go-lucky. She even roller skates around the hospital because that's how energetic she is. But after a series of devastating events that rocked the hospital itself, her character, I don't know what it is, but she just becomes angry and hateful towards everyone. And I want to know what you think about Arizona. I mean, because I know from you and I both watching the show, you've seen the decline she's had as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the problem is that the character's life was totally turned around by an unfortunate series of events, and it left the character with permanent issues going forward, and I think that just affected her overall outlook on life and her job and the people that she worked with, and I think she needed to reevaluate things for herself, and eventually the character ended up moving on and leaving the show. Part of the problem too is, I think with some of the characters, they change the characters, but in doing so, the show kind of paints itself into the corner with the character, because it gets to a point where they don't have storylines for the characters anymore. The characters are kind of just floundering because they don't really have anything new for them, and it's tough because you want to see the character go back to the way things were or do something different, and they're kind of just stuck.
In terms of, like you said, the show painting itself into a corner and wanting the characters to go back to the way things were. For anybody out there who doesn't know, Arizona Robbins and my father's favorite character, Dr. Callie Torres, they end up getting married, and after this series of events, because these events not only rock their lives, but it also shakes up the hospital as well. Everyone in it, and with these permanent issues that Arizona has, it ends up ruining their supposed happy marriage between the two of them, which actually, in my opinion, leads to one of the best episodes that the show has, and it's an episode titled "Mommy Tried," and it's essentially the custody battle between Arizona and Cali, which also divides the hospital because one side, there's actually three sides to it. One side wants to go with Arizona, one side wants to go with Cali, and then there's those people in the middle that aren't helping the situation. They're actually making the situation worse by not picking a side. And for me, I'm not going to spoil who wins the custody battle or anything, but for me it was one of the most heart-wrenching episodes because, like you said, the show approaches actual real-life situations, and situations like this, can tear a family apart and divide people. And I want to know what you have to say about the episode itself, because we actually watched that episode when it first aired, and I want to know what you have to say about it.
Well, that episode was very emotional, you're right, and I don't want to give anything away either for anybody who may be catching up on the show. It was very emotional, and it was very hard to watch, very true to real life, and kind of made people think about situations that they may have come across in their own life. And it was very upsetting, very emotional, very upsetting episode. Again, we won't disclose what happened in it, but it was hard to watch, really was. Yeah, it was a good episode, very good, very well written, very good, but it was very emotional as well.
Yeah, and like I said, with the people that are caught in the middle that don't want to pick a side, it's just they were making the situation worse because both sides were slowly turning on each other. We had people on Arizona's side who turned on her, or we had people on, I'm sorry, not Arizona, we had people on Cali's side who, such as Dr. Bailey, who currently runs the hospital, who ends up turning on them because she was attacking Dr. Richard Weber, who was the former chief of the hospital, for his drinking problems. Like it actually had something to do with the custody battle itself when they're simply close friends. To see Dr. Bailey, turn on Callie, who eventually I think most of her people turned on her because I don't know if it was the lawyer she had or what, but she just attacked each person. She just attacked them for some unknown reason.
It was a legal strategy that backfired basically.
And it was definitely hard to watch all these lovable characters that essentially didn't do anything wrong get verbally attacked, such as Dr. Richard Weber. For anybody who doesn't know, Dr. Richard Weber is one of the most lovable characters in the show. He ran the hospital at the beginning of the show, but he eventually steps down because he doesn't want to do it anymore. And it was hard to see him step out of the spotlight and into a side character role, but a lot of it had to do with, because the character himself suffers from really bad drinking problems, and we see flashbacks, and we see these situations. Even now he relapses, he falls off the wagon a couple times, and it shows the emotional baggage that shaped him. Because in my opinion, I always like to say that his kind of wisdom comes from mistakes, and we see throughout the show that he tries to prevent these younger doctors from making the same mistakes that he did, and it's just, he's very, very inspirational in the way he actually does things. But I want to know what you think about Chief. We call him Chief, but Dr. Weber, and how he helps these younger doctors.
Yeah, Richard Weber is a character that kind of is like the father figure on the show. He's the guy who people go to when they need advice. He's the guy who shows the younger residents how to do things, teaches them, gives them confidence, builds them up. He definitely is the father figure in the show. And he does have his own struggles, as does every other character on the show. And it's been an interesting progression to watch. Like you said, he goes from being in charge of the whole entire hospital to more of a kind of like a teaching role at this point. And you know, they show the struggles that he has with that along the way. But good character, like I said, fatherly character. A lot of shows have one, and he's it definitely for that show.
One thing that I'll always remember from Dr. Richard Webber, though, is hands down one of his greatest scenes, in my opinion, is when he essentially challenges Dr. Christina Yang, who isn't on the show anymore, but she was a very world-renowned cardiothoracic surgeon. He essentially challenges her to operate on a dummy, the two of them side by side, to perform some sort of stitching, I believe.
Yes, special kind of stitching.
And the challenge was, who could do it faster. And not only does he beat Christina Yang, he also does it with his eyes closed. And the one line that I'll always remember from that show, from that episode, hands down, is when Christina Yang walks up to him and she goes, "Sir, you did that with your eyes closed. How'd you do that?" And his only response is, "That's why I'm the chief." And that for me is always going to be one of the greatest lines that the show, that not only that episode but the show had, in my opinion.
Definitely, yeah, that was great.
But yeah, I mean, like I said, these characters, the character development is one thing that the show does really well. For anybody who doesn't know, the show is, I believe, written and directed, or is it just written by Shonda Rhimes?
Mm-hmm.
Very talented writer in the world of drama. She essentially, makes you feel good with these characters, and then she just tears her world down, and she's just very good at it. I don't know. She's very talented, and
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you can never rest easy with her, because she'll definitely pull the rug out from under you when you're not looking.
That's a definite. You never want to get too comfortable. You have these favorite characters, and next thing you know it, you're on one episode enjoying these characters, and then the character could, I don't know, die in a plane crash or get hit in a bus or something like that. You never know.
Yep. But I look forward to many more seasons of that show, hopefully. Hopefully they stay on for a while longer, and I look forward to any new characters that they add. It's a great show, definitely.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Ellis Hall, for being on the show. Thank you guys for listening. Be sure to listen live at cougarradio.net. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, like us on Facebook at Cougar Radio, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and listen on Spotify for our amazing podcast shows. Thanks for listening to Mitchell's Mystery Hour, guys.
Thanks, Mitch.